Hi, good afternoon, everybody. While we're getting the technology to work, I've been given what I thought in the first instance was going to be the privilege of presenting this food research to you. And as I've been listening to all the experts talk today, I've realised that I'm actually being thrown in the lion's den by the rest of my Miller team as I try to present some research to people who know it far better than I do. So I apologise if I offend anybody in advance with some of the findings, and I can blame the rest of my Miller team for the research that they did that I'm presenting today. So what we thought we'd do is, I've got my own slides here so I know where I'm going roughly, is to answer the question, is Abergavenny a food destination? So every year about springtime we get together as a team and decide what the theme for the food fair conference is going to be. And so this year when we said we'd look at what makes a food destination, we thought that really we should ask ourselves, is Abergavenny a food destination? We live and work in the area, so we have our own ideas of whether it's a food destination, but we thought we'd do some independent research and actually ask the people who come here to see what they think. So that's what we did. But before we do that, we'd like to attempt to do some audience participation. So there would have been on screen a link to a survey. So what I was going to ask you, if you could all get your smartphones, because of course you've all been tweeting throughout the conference, we've got a survey link, and luckily I can remember it. So if you're logged on, if you've got your smartphones, if you go to www.surveymonkey/s/Abergavenny.
Is that SurveyMonkey?
SurveyMonkey. Did I miss .com or .co.uk out of it? Which one is it, Maya? .com? Is it .com? Try that one. And if we get it up on the screen, there's a very short 2-question survey. For those of you who haven't got a smartphone, if you want to raise your hands. Try surveymonkey.com/s/Abergavenny. Relatively memorable. So yes, do we have any technophobes here without a smartphone? If you do, raise your hand and Maya will come around and do the survey the old-fashioned way. Of course, you'll realise there's only 2 questions, a yes and no answer, and we could have done this by a show of hands, but we thought we'd do it as audience participation. Yeah, so I'll try it again. For those who didn't, it's www.surveymonkey.com/s/Abergavenny. So while you're doing that and trying to figure that out, I'll carry on. So just to very quickly talk to you about what our research entailed. So the first thing to note about our research was that it was independent research. So we just decided ourselves that we were going to do this. So that means that we haven't got a client telling us what to do and telling us what the answer should be. We haven't got an agenda, there's no political agenda for it. And so we just decided that we wanted to know this for ourselves. But also what's important about that is that being independent, nobody's paying us to do the research. And as a consultancy, we quite like it when people pay us to do research. So on this occasion, without anybody paying us, the resources were rather slim. So I just say that with a bit of a caveat that the research we're about to do is based on some rather light touch evidence, and I'll discuss a bit more about that in a minute. So what we actually did, there was 4 main areas to the research. We did an audit of food outlets. So we looked at all food outlets that were in the Abergavenny area. We took a very rough finger in the air 10-mile radius of Abergavenny, and we just had a look at what the different range of food outlets there were, and we'll present some of that to you. We also did a little bit of distinctiveness assessment on it. So for those of you who know Miller's history, about 5 or 6 years ago, we carried out some work up in the northeast of England looking at retail distinctiveness, and we subsequently rolled it out in about 25 market towns across the UK. And this was to develop a toolkit, a way of measuring the distinctiveness of the retail offer in market towns. Part of that is to look at the food and drink segment. And so we did that in Abergavenny as well. It's something that we wanted to do in Abergavenny, so we took this opportunity to do that. And I'll just quickly show you some of the findings of the food and drink element of that. So that's looking at the food and drink offer in Abergavenny. The main part of the research was this online survey that we did, another online survey, you'd be pleased to know. This online survey was sent around through our contacts, so through emails, and I believe that most of you here probably received that email, and most of you probably filled in that survey, I'm guessing. We got 129 responses to that survey from all corners of the UK. So representation across the whole UK, and even 3 from outside of the UK. Now, the fact that I personally know who those 3 people are that live outside of the UK that filled in that survey just shows you how unstatistically reliable the survey results are. So once again, this isn't a statistically robust assessment. It is just simply a survey of our friends, if you like. So just to look at what that breaks down as, this is going to be really hard to do the next bit without graphs on a screen when I'm talking about graphs. So what it looks like is you've got 55% of the people who filled it in were female, and overwhelmingly the biggest proportion of people where people came from was Wales. So 46% of respondents, and this is all off the top of my head, 46% of respondents came from Wales. So that just shows you how far our influence of friends is. The other areas that were represented was, like I said, all other areas, but they all contributed to less than 10% each. I think it was the Southwest had 8% and London had 7%. So that's just a little bit of a background to where the people who filled our survey came from. But the majority, as you see, heavily biased towards Wales, which will be quite important if we ever get to see some graphs. 56%, this is another interesting fact, that's something worth remembering, is that 56% of those who filled in the survey have been to Abergavenny in the last 5 years. So again, you can see that they're based in Wales and they've been to Abergavenny. So that's how biased the sample was. We also did some qualitative interviews with some destination restaurants around town, just a small number of those. And we also did some desk review. So what we thought we'd do is, I thought I'd take you through a little bit of a story very quickly, just to kind of summarise where we were going with this research. So remember, our ultimate objective is to answer, is Abergavenny a food destination? Firstly, we thought we'd better answer the question, what is a food destination? And of course, we've listened to lots of speakers throughout the day already talking about this. So we found this, we thought we'd better put some heavyweight research into this. So we took this academic, still not there, we took this academic research and found a lovely quote in it, which I think summarises quite well what we're trying to say, encapsulates as a food destination. And I'm going to have to read it out to you. It says, the attractiveness of a gastronomic destination, one that should offer an authentic bite of local terroir, predominantly hinges on direct and indirect local participation. In other words, on how locals think, talk, and act around their local food. And I think that will resonate with a lot of what's been said earlier. So it's basically these two things: being able to get local food that has its history in the local area, but also that it's carried out and is carried through into the local culture. So it's kind of lived and breathed by the people who live in the local area. So when you come to visit, you can really get a sense of place. And the interesting thing in that while I'm still waiting for this, the interesting thing is that I quite like the word terroir. Does anybody know what it means? You all did a few nods. Well, I didn't yet. This time yesterday when I came across this and I realised I was going to put it on a slide in the presentation, I thought I'd better have a look to see what it means. So I looked on Microsoft Word's thesaurus and I was quite glad that it wasn't on there. So it's a word that we've loaned from French, so I didn't feel quite so dumb that I didn't know what this word was. So then I Googled it, like everybody does, and Wikipedia came with the answer. And I'm going to read this out again. And what it says is, terroir is the set of special characteristics that the geography, geology, and climate of a place interacting with the plant's genetics express in agricultural products. Which sounded great, and I still said, okay, so what does that mean? So it's all about getting this sense of place. So we hear it in lots of places, sense of place. And amazingly, halfway down the Wikipedia page, it then said that terroir can be loosely translated as meaning sense of place. So I'm going to make it my personal ambition to make people use terroir instead of sense of place when they're talking about destinations from now on. So that's what we're talking about in terms of destinations. We've got inherent and embedded food culture. And then I've got a graph, which we might be able to see. You've grown.
It's interesting though, Sam, from what you're saying there, because actually a lot of that fitted in with what we heard earlier, didn't we? That it's the combination of what the soil gives, as like we were hearing with cider, and also what the people do and the people's experience of food. Exactly. Which kind of fits with what we were hearing earlier.
And I'm glad it does. So the survey results that we were about to show here are where we asked people which of the following factors they thought defined a food destination, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to read it out again. So at the top of the list, we had... is that the one? Yep. Oh, now you can see what I'm talking about now. It makes it worse. So at the top of the list, you can see the range of food shops and restaurants. So this is what people who filled our survey in said most defined a food destination. So just to reiterate, just the important, the sort of illustrative thing out of this is that if you look at the second, third and fourth things, they're talking about the distinctiveness of food outlets, whether you can experience a type of cuisine that defines a destination and the existence of a food brand. So 3 out of the 4 factors that most define a food destination support what we just heard. So it's just to reiterate that that's what our survey responses also believed made a food destination. So then we thought, so we now know what makes a food destination. We thought we should then look at whether food really does influence visitors to a place. What we're talking about here is food tourism, and a lot has been written about food tourism. So here's a very quick synopsis of what we found about food tourism. And there's this general recognition that people travel to areas of high quality food. So food is just becoming increasingly important. As a result of this, there's this pull factor. So destinations are recognising that food and culture are intrinsically linked, and if you can link them together, and you can link them together well, you can differentiate your product, your place as an offering to another to increase people coming to your area. And then what you can see is that this does translate into a huge amount of spend. So I think it was the Wales Day Visitor Survey of 2012 showed that 2/5 of day visitor spend is on eating and drinking. That's nearly £1.5 billion worth of spend, so it's a huge market. However, and the important thing here is that the majority of food tourists are incidental. So that means that they're going to a destination for other reasons other than food. And whilst they're there, they decide to take on some local food and local food culture. And to evidence this, we turn to a Visit Wales survey that we've borrowed. And it's a survey of the Great Britain Marketing Evaluation Survey for the last 3 years, which shows what the most important reasons for visiting Wales are. And as you can see at the bottom of that list is good quality food and restaurants. So there are all these other things that are more important reasons for visiting Wales. Food only accounts for a small percentage of it. Looking at it the other way, what we can say is that 1 in 10 people, for 1 in 10 people, good quality food and restaurants is the most important reason they come for Wales. So we're starting to see, and it's alluding to what the typical food tourist might be. So that led us to this. So we kind of thought, okay, so let's find out who these 1 in 10 people are. You may have seen this before, but it's quite a good illustration of the sort of spread of tourists, the type of food tourists. So looking at the top, you have the gourmet tourism, which is those who are, their primary motivation is to travel to an area for food. At the other end of the spectrum are those who food is just subsidiary to their other interests. So the gourmet, gastronomic and culinary tourism often get used interchangeably. But if you think of it along a spectrum, you can think of those who have a very high interest in food. Their primary motivation for going somewhere, they will be the gourmet tourism. They will make up a very small proportion. So the size of the pyramid relates to the number of visitors. At the other end, those with low or no interest will be those who simply go to an area for something else. So on the previous slide, it's all the people that are coming to Wales for the countryside. And whilst they're there, they need to eat. They don't care where it is. They just go to somewhere where they can, a restaurant that they're familiar with, so a brand name, and just get some food. So that's the scale that we like to be thinking of. So then, and that just summarises it. I'll skip through it because it's a short time. So then we thought, well, let's have a look at our survey results to see what type of food tourists we've got amongst us. As you can see there, when asked what influence the quality of food has on your decision to visit, just over 35% of our survey said it has a very big influence. Just under 30%, fairly big influence. So the majority of them it has a big influence on their decision. So therefore, the people who filled in our survey are foodies, which is great, because what it shows is that even though our survey is completely biased, made up of people from Wales and who've been to Abergavenny, at least they're foodies, so they know what they're talking about. So we asked them then, what are the food destinations in the survey? And these are the results. So this is an unprompted question, open-ended, saying, where in the UK do you think is a food destination? And this is the results. So this is our answer, if you like. London, as you can see, came up strongest, closely followed by Cornwall, Ludlow and Abergavenny. Now, I'll just point out Melton Mowbray for 2 reasons, because it's spelt wrong, firstly. So we just wanted to highlight, and we do know it's spelt wrong. We just didn't want to change the Wordle, because it just takes takes too long. But also because it's not very big. And the reason why I pointed that out is because we also looked at other destinations. And so you've got the Lonely Planet's top 10 culinary destinations, and there you can see London at the top, Melton Mowbray in second, Cornwall and Abergavenny in fourth. This was actually our starting point for the research when we got together and to decide what we were going to do. We Googled it and to find out what the best places were. And this was our starting point. So we kind of thought, well, okay, so Lonely Planet think that Abergavenny is a food destination. Let's see what other people think. So that leads us to the next question, and the main crux of our research really is Abergavenny a food destination? So firstly, we looked at what's it got. The food festival, of course. I don't need to tell you much about the food festival. You already know about it. It's been described by the Wanderlust Travel magazine as a mecca for food lovers from all over the UK and beyond. And I heard from somebody earlier on today that Abergavenny is one of only 2 UK food festivals to come in a list of top 10 worldwide food festival destinations. So it is a very well-known and far-reaching draw to Abergavenny. What does Abergavenny also have? It also has destination restaurants, and to name just a few, you've got the Walnut Tree, the Hardwick, the Fox Centre and the Angel Hotel. There are a few others. This isn't, that was just a list, a sample of them, but it also has some excellent produce, as we've seen today, and we've heard from lots of people talking about this excellent produce. So that's what Abergavenny's got. This is what our survey results said, the people who filled in our survey, when asked what were the main attractors to Abergavenny for them. And quite clearly you can see it's food festivals and good restaurants, and then you can see the names of a few of the restaurants like the Walnut Tree and the Angel. Markets also get some mention, but you can see that local food is just a tiny little word there, with the size of the word reflecting how many people said it, of course. So clearly there are 2 main draws to Abergavenny, the food festival and the good restaurants. So then looking a bit further about the food offer. So this is the results of our audit, where we looked at all the different food outlets in Abergavenny. Just to have a quick look across the list, on the left-hand side you can see that public houses and bars, the largest proportion. Producers, there are an awful lot of producers. Restaurants and cafes, and then it kind of falls away with takeaways. And at the other end you can see food festivals and farmer markets. There are a few of them but very influential ones. And also the few food and drink experience. That's just a very quick look through what Abergavenny's got. Focusing on just the services, just the restaurants, we broke that down by different segments, and you can see that over half of all of the service outlets are popular dining or pub food, so that's fit into the category, which meets this mass market. So thinking back at the food tourism spectrum that we had, so there are a lot of restaurants in this mass market. There are a few at the top end, fine dining specialist, and then there's 16% of fast food or takeaway, and then about a quarter of all are coffee bars or tea shops, which I think reflects Abergavenny. Having lived here for most of my life and walked up the high street, you kind of get a sense of. So then we applied our distinctiveness, and this is a very quick go through our distinctiveness model. So what you're looking at here are some of the variables on the left-hand side of what we look at. And the one worth pointing out is the local food and sourcing. So in looking at all of the food and drink outlets in Abergavenny and assessing the sort of prominence of local food and specialist foods, it scores very lowly. It scores very low. Diversity of offer, it scores a little bit bigger. It's a little bit bigger, but it's still not very big on the potential that it could have, and that's probably because of the dominance. Like over half of them were fit within the popular dining segment. So clearly, if you look at the distinctiveness, Abergavenny doesn't appear to be very distinctive. So we plotted this on our graph. The comparative towns we've got there aren't the food destinations that we had on the other list, because we didn't go around all of those towns and assess the distinctiveness. These are based on towns that we've previously done the retail distinctiveness. So just looking at the food and drink offer and comparing it, you can see that Abergavenny is quite sizable. On the left-hand side, going up the axis, the higher up you go, the more size of the food offer that there is. So in Abergavenny, it's quite large. On the right-hand side, you've got the distinctiveness rating, and so that's effectively that, the prominence of local sourcing in the shops. So as you walk up the high street, you don't really get this sense that all this excellent produce that is in the area is available. And thus, it's on the left-hand side, even behind places like Henley-on-Thames and Tame in Oxfordshire that aren't renowned, although Tame has its own food festival now, aren't renowned as food destinations or don't have such an iconic draw as Abergavenny does. So how does Abergavenny match demand from tourists? And this is just a quick breakdown. So the blue lines are from the Wales Tourists survey of where people like to eat when they go to destinations. And we can see that just Abergavenny, if you just do a sort of comparison by numbers of places, then there's not as many good quality restaurants, but there are a lot of pubs and bars. And so this is where all of the food offer in Abergavenny currently resides. Now this, apologies for the presentation of this, I realise it's not the easiest to read. So this is again looking at the survey respondents, and they were asked which of the following statements best describes your opinion of Abergavenny as a destination. Now the top two is, I think Abergavenny is an excellent example of a food destination, and I think Abergavenny is a good example of a food destination. So you can see the largest two proportions, so putting them together, it's nearly just under half of people think it's either a good or an excellent destination. So again, as we said at the start, the people who's filled in our survey could be related to the gourmet travel. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Could be likened to the gourmet traveller because they are the ones who are highly influenced by food. We also saw from the Wordle that there's two key things that appeal to the people who filled in our survey: food festival and the destination restaurants. We also see here that the people who filled in the survey do think that Abergavenny is an excellent destination. Would they recommend it? We don't definitely recommend it. It's just under half, which actually surprised me when I first looked at this, because I thought that if most of them would recommend it as a good example or an excellent example, what's that say about them? So perhaps, and this is just me speculating, that maybe they realise that they're foodies and that they're interested in things like the food festival and the destination restaurants. But for their friends who may not be such avid foodies, they may not recommend it because you've got this sort of dearth of local prominence of local food in the restaurants. So I'll come back to that. So quickly going through how does it compare. We asked people to rank it against the places that we saw on the Lonely Planet's top 10 culinary guide. If you just look at a straightforward weighted average, Abergavenny comes in 5th. So similar to where it was when we looked at the other things. However, myself and Nick spent about 3 hours yesterday trying to take the bias out of the survey by applying sort of weighted proportions to the rest of the UK. And when we realised that we simply weren't going to be able to do it because the data that we had just wasn't going to be able to use to express, for example, a whole region like Scotland or the North East based on 1 or 2 surveys, we decided that we would just simply take the bias out in a different way. So for all of these areas, we took out the responses for those people who live in the area. So what you now see is Abergavenny at the bottom of the list. We've taken out the 46% of people who came from Wales. So now you're seeing what other people from outside of those areas think about that town. And you can see that Abergavenny then fares far worse. It actually comes bottom of the list as a destination, which is, again, quite interesting. So to look at, we just looked at what Abergavenny's got, what Abergavenny hasn't got, what we're saying it hasn't got, and this is from talking to people, so qualitative interviews as well as some of the other research that we've done, is a food culture. What we're saying that it has got local produce, it's got excellent local produce and lots of it. We saw the list of lots of producers. It just doesn't have an obvious presence of it on the high street, outside of the food festival and in the destination restaurants and some key examples where you can get good food. There isn't this obvious presence of local produce. It doesn't have a full range of food retail. And just to pick on a few, there aren't any artisan bakers, for example, or there's no fishmongers anymore. But there are also, apart from the farmers market, once a month, you can't really get any local produce if you were just to come into Abergavenny most of the time. What we also found, and this was interesting for some of the destination restaurants, is that there's just not this local demand. There's a lack of local interest. And what they're saying is that to create a food town, you need local people with an interest in going out for food regularly. And that takes us back to the first definition of what is a food destination. People really have to live it, and have to live it and breathe it, and really sort of use this local cuisine as a way of expressing the culture. And what they're saying is that there's just not this local interest. So therefore, it's just not performing as a food destination. So a very quick summary of what we think. So just to overlay what we think on the onto the sort of spectrum of the food tourist, what we're saying is at the top level, at the gourmet end, the destination restaurants, that they're there, and they're sort of satisfying the needs of those people who are highly motivated by food as a place to visit. You've also got the food festival, but what you've got in the middle is this missing is this local, distinctive, popular dining and retail. So we've got this huge amount of pubs and this dining sector, but it's just not tied into the local, and it's not distinctive at the moment, and that's what we think is really missing. At the rural urban end, there is a lot of restaurants to fill those, so it's just missing this middle level of gap. So to summarise what we think, for gourmet tourists, those who are highly influenced by food, the people who filled in our survey, Abergavenny is an excellent destination, as the survey results said. It's got excellent events, it's got destination restaurants. For others, those who aren't highly motivated by food, we would say it's not a food destination. There are a few popular outlets selling food or distinctive food, and there is a limited food culture. But the wide area is, so this is what we're finding, is a food destination, and that's because you've got everything else, the location. So we saw countryside being the biggest influence for visitors coming to Wales. So therefore, they come into Wales for that, and as incidental food tourists, they're trying sampling some of the local food. So then, in that respect, local food becomes a bonus, another strand to what Abergavenny has to offer. That was what we thought. So we'd now like to have a quick look at what you thought. I was hoping it would come up on the screen, but as soon as we couldn't get the projector to work at the beginning, it's no surprise I got it on a piece of card. Like I said, I could have just done it with a show of hands. I needed an envelope to open. So you asked two questions. Is Abergavenny a food destination? 85% of you said yes. So what does that make you all? Gourmet tourists. And then is it a food culture? 48% said yes. So the majority of you said no. So you agree with us that there is no food culture, which is fantastic. So all this research has just come back to what you already knew. Thanks very much.